This is Let's Talk Big, the Big Read with Jane Berger and Jen Hazel. The Owens Community College Campus Read is taking place now and throughout the semester, with the goal of bringing awareness of different perspectives through books. The Campus Read book is Kerri, a Memoir of Survival on Stolen Land, from 2020 recipient of the NEA Creative Writing Fellowship, Tony Jensen. It's a memoir and essays about gun violence, land, and Indigenous women's lives. Now sharing passages, topics, and events related to the book, Kerri, a Memoir of Survival on Stolen Land, is Owens Community College Director of Library Services, Jane Berger, and Professor of English, Jen Hazel.
Hi everyone, I'm Jen Hazel and I have with me
Jane Berger
and
Kerri Weishampel.
And we're here today to hear the continuation of Kerri's project, where she was headed to South Dakota to learn more about Mona Lisa Tuigo and meet Mona Lisa's younger brother, Phil. Tell us about this visit.
When I got to South Dakota, I was able to get in touch with Phil right away. He knew we were coming. He had invited us, which was wonderful. And you can see a lot of this footage in my No Foul Play Part 2 podcast on Equal Justice Podcast on YouTube. But the first place we went was to where they found Mona Lisa's body. And I wasn't sure he was going to show me that or want to go there. I wasn't sure how much he wanted to go down that memory lane. Mm-hmm. But he was really willing to share everything and open up old wounds because he wanted people to know. As you know, there has been very little investigation done. So we went to the Wallen Ranch and stood on this field where they had found her frozen body in early February 1979. And he told me a lot of the details. And I realized while he was talking, even though the reports online, the only information you can get says he was 12, he was 15 when he saw his sister get into the truck and drive away, and no one interviewed him about that. No police asked him anything. He saw the truck, he knew the men in the truck, because everybody did. As spread out as Rosebud is, people know each other.
Did he ask to be interviewed, or did he say, I saw what happened, and was just rebuffed? Or?
I asked him that, actually. I said, didn't you tell them you knew? And he said he waited for them to ask him, and nobody did, because he was young. The Lakota, this took me a while to figure out, but they had been betrayed with language. Back when their children were stolen, when their land was stolen, when the Laramie Treaty was stomped on, they had learned that people learned their language and used it against them. So the Lakota became leery of even speaking to each other in anyone else's presence. Mm-hmm. And as a result, language is another thing we took from them. And they don't speak as freely as you or I might. He waited for people to ask him, and also they were used to getting no justice. So if they're not even going to look for her, they thought no one cares. No one's going to do anything. That's hard to imagine, but that's where they were. You or I would be maybe banging down the door saying, you have to listen to me, this is what happened. But they were so used to being disregarded and being so unimportant that they thought no one's going to care about this young dead Lakota woman, so we won't bother.
How did that experience make you feel hearing that and seeing that grave?
It does change your perspective to immerse yourself in the place where it happened. And I just felt very compelled to go there. Having cared so much about her story and seeing her grave, you feel the full magnitude of the injustice. And I just couldn't help thinking, this woman should be here talking to her brother, not me. Aside from, nobody really caring what happened, they know who did it. And from time to time, Phil sees one of those men. He's homeless and wanders around. And the man who allegedly, according to everyone, is the number one suspect, is still there. And it's sad that this is actually not a one thing that only happened to them. Sorry, this is a little more common. Mm-hmm. There are people who know who committed crimes and can't get anyone to investigate them. But seeing where his whole family was buried and her children, some of them were buried by her too. She was buried between her parents. And he pointed out different members of the family. One, you can see in my podcast, has a soldier over the grave because he died in Vietnam. They went and fought for our country.
Mm-hmm. That's very ironic, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but we can't search out the murderer.
Yeah.
They can't get the same justice.
Yeah.
Right.
I can't believe no one would ask. And that's why I went to the Bureau of Indian Affairs and tried to find out what happened to her files that nobody can find. And I've narrowed it down to 2 locations. You'll see at the end of the podcast how I'm going to proceed.
Ooh. But you just
Always
keep
giving me a
leaving us on, hanging on tenterhooks.
I know, like literally, Kerri, come on now. Tell us a little bit more about what Phil had to say about the experience and how did it feel creating this bond in this relationship with Phil?
You know, it was something where I have mixed feelings, but I tend to have, be of 2 minds about many things. So I saw different sides of it. I have a need to help. When we listened to Toni Jensen and she asked us why we're drawn to what we do, I think that's the best question you can ask students. And she said, what is it that you like about what you want to do? And I wrote down, I want to help people and find answers. And I realized that that is my nature, and that has to do with why I continue to do this. But I also want to be very aware that this isn't about me, and I don't want to do anything to feed my ego. I just want to help. Even when I mention my observations, they're just my observations. I met a small amount of Lakota people. It's very easy when you're in a culture shock to assume that every experience you have is indicative of the entire community. So I was aware that these are my individual experiences. Could be a microcosm and there's a lot of diversity, but what does seem to be universal is the lack of justice for missing and murdered Indigenous women. I feel that I'm very honored that Philemon has become a friend who's invited me in and shared so much with me. He's a leader among his community and actually has recently been interviewed by the White House because of his involvement with climate change. So he's being listened to on that score, and that's a wonderful thing that he is being given a voice there. But I want to see what happened to those files. And so for me, vowing to keep her story going is important. My son asked me, why would you do this when it's a 30-year-old cold case and maybe nobody cares? It's older than that. If nobody can solve it, you can. I said, and maybe I can't, but what I can do is keep people talking about it and keep the subject on the table so that people are aware, just like with your Red Dress Project, that it has people asking questions and becoming aware, and we can inform everyone and maybe create a movement of change.
Did you talk to anyone in the Rosebud Police Department?
I did.
What was their answer for where the files
They
have
actually,
gone?
it was bizarre to me that they didn't know, but I was told by everyone that they're not going to talk to you. They're not going to talk to you. And so when I went in there were 2 nice women sitting in an office, and I said, hi, everyone says you will not talk to me, but I have faith in you.
I like the positive approach.
And they laughed, and they were interested. And I said, I tried to be concise and make it short. I traveled a long way. I'm looking to investigate a 1979 murder, and I hope you can help me because I'm told that her files are missing. They brought me into a gentleman who is from the Cheyenne Nation, who was very nice. They were all so pleasant, and they admitted they didn't know much about it, which is unbelievable considering they're on the Rosebud Reservation.
Yeah.
Right.
How could not everybody know? They really weren't familiar. One woman did go to school with Lucille, and they knew of them. They were really nice, and so they said, we are having our 200-year celebration. You came at the worst time because the person who's been working here 36 years, who would know what happened to these files, she's not here. So they gave me her number, Andrea Wong. I saw Wong, and I said, wait, that's the ranch we were on where they found her body. So I called Phil, and I said, Phil, the person I'm supposed to talk to about this, the detective's name is Andrea Wong. That has to be the same Wong. And he said, oh, you talked to Andy? I said,
oh my gosh.
How can you not know? And again, this is going to be redundant if you listen to my podcast, but I just said, how could they not have helped? And again, that goes back to the fact that there is a language breakdown and a lack of communication because of the trauma that has gone on for generations. Sure. Even when they know each other, they don't initiate any kind of poking or prodding. And I'm still learning about Lakota culture through Phil. But, they were very young when this happened, so they were probably a little bit shielded from it as much as possible. And he found out some things after my visit that, had him talk to his older brother, Leon. He spoke to him. And that brother said, oh, she was killed somewhere else and brought there. And I thought, because he's even older, he was older than Mona Lisa, I think. And there were about 15 siblings, so forgive me if I don't have quite all of those details. I hope to iron those out in the next upload. But he said that there were people, because I asked him, I said, where was she going? Was she going to work? She knew them? He said she was just a young person going out to have fun. So there was kind of a tavern in town. She went with them to go there. Those are the last people that were with her when she was alive. But he said, the older brother, that they went to a house and they believe she was murdered there and then dumped in the field. The shirt was, she was half clothed. I want to know where that shirt is. There's got to be touch DNA on those clothes.
Right. And if you had it, they
Easy
could
enough
test
to-
it, like
sure.
try to test it and at least see if it's still viable.
They recently solved a crime with touch DNA from 1980. That lasts a very long time. It doesn't break down its skin. It's
Right.
it will still be there in those clothes if they can find them. One woman said, I remember we had to bag up and label a lot of information because in the early 80s, the FBI took over.
That's what I was going to ask. That's, I watch all these crime shows. And that's, what they would do is put everything in a bag and then they would take it for analysis. But then what happens if it's never solved? How long do they keep it? Where do they put it?
It's in a warehouse. So I'm told there's one warehouse that still houses everything. So it wasn't taken for analysis. It was taken for possession and just to store.
And that warehouse is somewhere near
There-
Rosebud?
There are those who believe that the boxes were taken to Washington, but the gentleman from Cheyenne said there was a location in Kentucky
Oh.
and a location 4 hours north, but another woman said she didn't think they were taken to Kentucky. So we've got maybe 4 hours north of Rosebud or in Washington, D.C., but the person who would know is Savannah Peterson, and she will not get back to me. She's the detective, or she should know.
Okay.
And maybe she does.
I'm afraid somebody threw it out, to be honest.
It would track
Or,
with the way
or
things...
burned it or
Yeah.
something. So, Kerri, because I know you, I know that you're not giving up and you're going to find that
true.
evidence. I mean, and
I'll keep looking. Somebody will have to talk to me.
because if you just keep making yourself,
Making
Yeah.
a noise, squeaky wheel.
I
Right.
like to use my natural people repellent because if I just sit there politely, just sit there, that's how I got my doctor's information. They weren't giving to me, and I said, okay, I'll just sit here and wait. 5 minutes of me sitting there, and they would have done anything to get me out of there. So they got my records, and I'm counting on that. That's my superpower.
I like that.
there are so many people that are so interested and invested in hearing this story. And this story, not necessarily of your journey of learning about missing and murdered Indigenous women, but learning the story of
Yeah,
Mona
this
Lisa Tuligo.
specific story.
I think that's super important for you to know how there is people who are invested in this because you did what the whole idea of that original project was, to put awareness out there and to want to hear and to want to learn more. And I'm so proud of you. I can't even say how proud I am of you. I also want to ask you a few questions about your honors project, because you are here and you are wearing your honors medallion
Yes.
that you earned, and you were not able to be with us on the day of the symposium. I want to hear about the documentary that you made, because you also learned about the relocation schools. Tell us about that experience, because you said Phil took you to St. Francis. Tell us about that experience.
Yes, and that was talking about wanting to cry. I do this thing where I'll just cry in the car. When they told me about their sister with such affection, I'm like, I'll just cry later. That's what I used to do when my son was an ambassador for St. Jude. I'll just cry later. And so I had to do that at the assimilation schools. When I learned that we had to go down that route, I was so worried that I would not be able to get through it, because I really am hypersensitive. I can't watch news stories where things happen to children or old people or anybody more, vulnerable or marginalized. So I just thought, as a mother too, the worst thing you can imagine is somebody taking your child from your arms permanently and for no reason. And that's what happened to the Lakota. So when I went to St. Francis, I knew I was standing where terrible things had taken place, and I wanted to see where the dorms were. They've long since been closed down. It's this big lavender church. at a time, there were 3 different religions vying for control of that, and the government gave it to the Jesuits, and it is now a Christian academy, day school, Roman Catholic. And I spoke to Howard Compton, and he was very nice. He's a director there. And he told me a lot of pleasant things about St. Francis, but of course I needed to delve into the dark past, because assimilation schools began with an idea that it was in the best interest of indigenous people to strip them of their culture entirely, and taking children from their parents, which, as many of us know, are in abusive situations. As an adult, I don't like to be in a scary situation, but as a child, I can't imagine being taken from everything you know, being hit if you spoke your language, having your hair cut off, being so far away from the only comforts you've ever known, and having all of that forced on you. That's frightening, and that was part of why I wanted to go to an actual assimilation school. I felt like it was the least I could do.
Where can we see this documentary?
It will be on OutCommPlus. You'll have an opportunity. It'll be right next to your podcast, No Foul Play. We want to make sure that that gets out there and that people are aware. We did a lot of work this year. We've done a lot of work as an institution in the last couple of years, really starting to look at our Native peoples and learning about them. And I almost want to say like the real history, as we've talked a lot about, maybe not what some of us we learned in a textbook.
That was just all glossed over and just the surface. Most of it was happy or very benign.
Right, because it was so much of it was like that they loved going to the school, when instead what it is yes, very, very different.
Yeah.
And that's what you get too if you talk to someone from the school. Of course, they work there, they're the director there, they see a good side of the school, and it's not really something they want to delve into. I learned that school still feels the trauma from things that happened at Canadian boarding schools, and what happened at Carlisle. The credit goes to you and Owens for putting a focus on this and educating students so that they too want to help and become aware of the injustice. That's what sparked it for me, that focus on Indigenous people and the plight of missing and murdered Indigenous women.
Thank you. I'm so happy that I had you in class and we did this. This has enriched us so much, this experience. And like I said, people are dying to hear what you are saying, so I'm super excited to hear it. So one last thing, tell me about the brochure you made.
I made a brochure. I think you remember I wasn't sure if my advocacy project was going to be about Mona Lisa, and so you can consider that one supplemental, but the brochure that I wanted to present was made for the National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition, and I found them online. This is a wonderful organization, and I used what they had to create a brochure that I could hand out. I actually called them, and their media person wasn't available, but I wanted to see what they wanted most prevalent in it. If you were just going to use 3 pages to tell their story and what's about their organization, I tried to pick the things that were most important. And so I have actual pictures and words from their website. I actually wanted to pick stuff that would make people go there and show that the bill that they want people to vote on that is causing an investigation into the assimilation schools and the trauma that people have experienced for generations from that.
Who ran these schools? Were they run by just different organizations, or?
Yes, they were initially started by a man, General Brigadier Henry Pratt, who had gone to Florida and seen that Apache people who were prisoners could speak a lot of English. And he got the idea that education was the only difference between what he thought were going to be, quote, atrocious Aborigines and educated people. So his thing was, he wrote to the government and said, and by the way, they would make great workers, but we can, in addition to beating them, make them join us. And so they decided that the best thing to do, his phrase was, kill the Indian, save the man. He thought that was a good phrase. He was proud of that. Carlisle School was given to him. It was an old military base. And he took that over and started the first school that immediately started abducting children, bringing them there, cutting their hair, putting them in, quote, proper clothing. And there are a lot of before and after pictures online of people their first day there and afterwards. And the Apache prisoners, the children who were sent there, were already frail from being starved and malnourished and sick,
Yeah.
and so a lot of them died and are buried in the 180 graves at Carlisle.
Wow.
I'm very proud of the young Rosebud. I have to say real quick, there's a young Lakota group that has fought for 6 years to get the bodies back. There were 11 children, but they could give them the names of 9. So they gave them the bodies, and they had a big caravan with ceremonies that took them all the way home to South Dakota.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, that is really awesome. So, Kerri, thank you for coming on. Now, we're going to have you back because we're going to keep wanting to hear about this story, and we want to keep the message out there, too. This was our big read for the 2023-2024 academic year, but we still do a lot with Indigenous people and putting the message out there. And I think it's super important that even though we might be podcasting about our new theme and our new book and stuff, to continue to have these, because it's important to not forget and to keep awareness out there. And what you've done is really incredible. So that's what we need to
That's
keep
the
that
focus.
focus.
Yep, and let's.
I really appreciate that. I could tell from the beginning that for Owens, this was so much more than just a flavor of the month cause du jour. You know, that sometimes you see like, oh, let's all sell blankets, and then next week it's on to something else.
Yeah.
This is really a movement that has started and can create justice for people.
That is way going to do it for us today. Kerri, thank you again for coming so much.
you
Always
for
a
having me.
delight. And always, Jane, I enjoy being here with you.
No
So,
passage, but that's all right. We had something better.
yeah, it might have been a little better than a passage today. On behalf of Jane and Kerri, I'm Jen Hazel. Keep talking big.
Catch Let's Talk Big on Outcast OCCR Owens Community College Radio every Thursday at 7 a.m., 10 a.m., 7 p.m., and 10 p.m., and at various times throughout the week. Or listen anytime on the Owens OutCommPlus YouTube channel. Let's Talk Big on the Owens OutCommPlus YouTube channel. Be sure to like and subscribe. And join us again here for Let's Talk Big, the big read with Jane Berger and Jen Hazel.